Great. Thank you, SM. So I think for the interest of time, and I know some of you have a lot of commitments, I would like to say that it's let's start now. It's my pleasure to have this session at COP27 on land governance, natural resources, and climate change, and which will be it's a great opportunity actually to introduce the recently completed and released report done by Inhabitat Global Landfill Network, the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, with the support of BMZ and other partners, which actually concludes a journey of 3 years through which we have conducted 2 expert group meetings, several consultation, a validation workshop, and we collected with our partners a lot of knowledges and experiences and field perspective on climate change and how it impacts the Arab region, but also how the correlation between land governance, natural resources, land degradation play out in this region. It will also be an opportunity to overall to discuss these 3 connected, very closely interconnected topics, also with our colleagues from the FAO in the occasion of the 10 years anniversary of the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of land, fishery, and forestry. So without further ado, I would like to start to give the floor to the first of our speakers who will do opening remarks for us. We have online Anke Opperman, the Director of Decent Work Worldwide Food and Nutrition Security Directorate at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as BMZ. Dear Anke, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ombretta, and a very good morning from Berlin to you all. Dear participants, it's a great pleasure to be part of this important event. Since 2018, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, has been supporting the Arab Land Initiative, which has become a unique platform that addresses key challenges in the land sector of the region. We at BMZ look forward to continuing our support over the next years. It is a great opportunity to speak here at the COP27 about the link between land and climate change. In the Arab region, this connection is of particular importance. Therefore, we appreciate the work done by UN Habitat, Global Land Tool Network, and the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies with this report that will be presented shortly. This report comes at a critical time. It contributes to filling the gap regarding questions related to land governance, land rights, and tenure security in changing climatic conditions in the Arab region. The report shows us that efforts will have to be stepped up if we want to achieve the global climate goals. To show the way forward, the report offers a few recommendations that we will look into and consider in our work with partner countries. In order to get the discussion started, I would like to highlight very briefly some key aspects presented by the report which attracted my attention. It matters how we govern land. We witness increasing land degradation driven by overgrazing, monocultures, unplanned and unregulated urbanization, growing land speculation, and loss of biodiversity. Women in the Arab region are particularly disadvantaged, especially those affected by conflict, displacement, and migration. With less access to land and property rights, women are thus more exposed to the adverse effects of climate change. Secure access to land and tenure security is a matter of food security. They are critical to both rural and urban communities that depend on land for their livelihoods. Looking at the numerous recommendations presented in the report, I believe some deserve particular attention on the way ahead. We need to aim for a climate-smart urbanization with land governance and land usage that allows for sustainable and resilient agriculture. All legitimate land tenure rights need to be protected, including those of pastoralists and farmers, and disputes on land shall be resolved by rule of law. Women's land rights ought to be an integral part of legal and institutional frameworks. It is crucial to involve civil society and all stakeholders in a political dialogue on land use. All these elements are necessary to transform local land use and arrive at a more fair land governance, literally preparing the ground for resilient and sustainable food and agriculture systems. With this in mind, I would like to wish us all a successful event and an inspiring discussion with valuable outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Anke, for joining us today and for your opening remarks and for the continuous report of your government to the work on land governance in the region and overall. I have now the pleasure of passing the word to Robert Louis Lattington, the Chief of the Land, Housing and Shelter Section at UN Habitat and the Secretary of the Global Land Tool Network. Over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Umbretta. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Okay,
at least we got through, and thank you to the technical support for getting through these things. It's never easy these days. Obviously, the same gratitude for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for everybody who's participating. You know, it's a wonderful sort of confluence of issues here. I mean, to be discussing climate, land, and from the habitat point of view, urban and development in a conference in the Middle East, where it all really began, I think has a particular sort of resonance and symbolism. You know, the fact that climate is a basic driver and determinant of whether urban growth occurs or not, and that links very much to agricultural systems and the stability and feasibility of the connections between all of these systems is extremely important. And that highlights why land is so important to UN Habitat and its program, and also as something that is a fundamental underpinning, a foundational element of many, many human rights. The right to housing, the right to food, the right to life. Land cuts across all of these. Economic opportunity is often determined by land. So that continues today, and I think the discussions that have been happening in the COP27 forum highlight how climate continues to be a determinant and a driver of what we are talking about. And again, it is the relationship with land that has a fundamental impact on human lives here. We also note from a habitat point of view that urban development is absolutely central to both adaptation and mitigation concerns. Our urban areas are massively vulnerable to climate change, and it is our land uses and our ways of managing land within urban areas that determine a lot of those outcomes. There is also an awful lot of concern around mitigation. Urban areas are generating a massive amount of emissions. They are also, you know, whether that be through transport, whether it be through construction, whether it be through other economic activity. So very, very tight relationships across the board. And also the positioning and the nature of urban areas drives a lot of agricultural systems. Within that, the Global Land Tool Network was originally developed with a logic of many people had said, we don't know how to provide a stable land system that gives people, institutions, structures predictable land tenure security. We know we want it, but we don't know how to do it. The Global Land Tool Network was founded to say the solutions are out there and we can show you where they are. We can provide them. So we generate the land tools and we then try to work with partners as much as possible in distributing those and getting them into use and proof of concept and changing the realities on the ground. So we're very much about proving that problems can be solved. The Arab States program has grown out of the regional specificity of these things. There is a very specific climate ecosystem set of situations within the countries in the region. There is also a very specific history and nature of urban development, which is largely quite a long way ahead of many other regions. There are also a number of governance peculiarities. There are particular systems, particular issues that the region faces. And so we need to adapt to those when we're looking at policy formulation, but also looking at how technical solutions function on the ground. Climate is increasingly, well, it has always been a central influence in regional dynamics, but it is increasing in importance today, particularly because it changes the physical and the policy parameters within which we work, but it is also fundamentally driving a lot of the economic and social stability that we need to be able to get economic growth, to be able to get respect for rights, and the basic objective of the United Nations as a whole to achieve ever-increasing human dignity for all. These are central questions. I have to thank BMZ, the previous speaker, but also all of her team and also the Habitat Regional Office for Arab States team for making not only this event possible, but also the program that this event comes from. This is a collaboration of many different actors, and that involves providing the financing, but also the political space, the connections, the knowledge, and the experience to make it all work. That also brings in all of the partners who contributed to the study that is being launched today, and all of you who are in this meeting. We can only make these things work, and we can only make them change facts on the ground if everybody is working with us, and we will continue to commit to be as open to that as we possibly can. In closing, I would also say, from our point of view, we are still very much in the early stages of this journey. We are beginning to get a proper grip on how big a scale there is to this challenge of climate change, land, and how that relates to economic and social prosperity. We have a long way to go. I hope we are, in the cliched words, I hope we are near the end of the beginning, that we really do understand and take it as seriously as it needs to be. Now we need to move on to doing what we need to do. And we are very much determined to continue to be as open and constructive as we can in working with all of you to achieve that. And to start with, we look forward to continuing to share this report and work on the follow-up with you at every stage. So thank you for that, and over to the rest of you, and I wish you all a very good discussion. Over.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your introductory opening remarks and for all the support that you are lending on a daily basis to this program and, of course, to the broader GLTN ecosystem. I would like now to pass the word to Rania Abi Habib, the program manager at the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, which is an independently managed, non-partisan, non-profit, and non-governmental think tank founded in 1989, whose mission is to produce and advocate policies that improve land governance, that include actually governance in general, including land governance in Lebanon and in the Arab region. Rania, the floor is yours. Rania, we cannot see you or hear you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me now?
I think now you're coming up.
Yes. Hello. Can you? Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
All right. I was just promoted to panelist, so I'm fixing my settings.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So we are equally happy to have partnered with UN Habitat and other partners on this research study and to get the chance to present it and discuss it with you today at the COP27. The research project on land, natural resources, and climate change in the Arab region aims at providing relevant central government authorities, municipalities, land institutions, policymakers, and others concerned with land governance with recommendations that would help them better identify and analyze the multiple linkages and interrelations between land governance, climate change-related challenges, and natural resources management, specifically water, and understand how climate change can negatively affect land tenure security and how adequate land governance can contribute to putting in place more effective climate adaptation strategies that recognize land tenure rights. As part of the project, we had 2 expert group meetings that aimed at creating knowledge and sharing experience among experts and organizations working on land and climate change and on pastoral lands and range lands in the Arab region and globally. The recommendations which stemmed from these meetings helped enrich our research study. I will now leave the floor to my colleagues to present and discuss the study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Rania. And thanks for the support and all the work that the Lebanese Center for Policy Study has been doing in the past years to get us where we are with this report. And we wish this is the beginning of further collaboration with the center. Before now, we pass to the second phase of the second part of this program. So I thank again all those who gave opening remarks. I would like actually to give a very quick overview of the very screen, if I manage. Yes, very quickly. Initial I would say a summary of the content of the report to set the ground and for the speakers to come in and give more information about it. So the topic of today and as well as the content of a report is around land governance, nature resources, climate change in the Arab region as topics that overall contribute to the sustainable development in the region. We all, I think, know it well, but is a region that is highly urbanized, 60% urban. 90% of the people live only on 4% of the land. So you can imagine the type of congestion and conflict and encroachment of different land uses that happen in this very tiny portion of land that are, mostly around coastal areas and around the riverine areas. Very much a region on the move with 40 million migrants and over 21 million displaced people. And also a region that has some fragility in terms of, we know with many countries witness revolutions, war, protests and governmental changes in the past 10 or 15 years. But also the region is the most scarce in terms of water access, with 18 out of 22 countries really severely water insecure. That really is a driver of conflict and is very much related to access to land and related natural resources. Desertification and land degradation are also key issues. We know that over 70% of the land area is considered degraded, and that has a number of implications for on many aspects of the life of people, but also of the animals on it. So at the Arab Land Initiative, we focused on this connection between or this intersection between land governance, nature resource, and climate change with this report that we are presenting today. In a nutshell, the manifestation of climate change in the Arab region are these ones. We have droughts, decreased precipitation, floods, sea level rise and salination of actually freshwater reserve, land degradation, desertification, temperature rise, and increase of forest fires. And that clearly impacts people on the region in many ways. You know, we have rural to urban migration. The World Bank actually estimates that 20% of the people who do migrate from rural to urban areas are climate, basically migrants. Displacement, loss of biodiversity, food insecurity, loss of livelihood, and overall an increase of conflict and competition over natural resources. If we look now, on the other hand, at the land governance challenges, we see again of overgrazing, land use, conversions, you know, from, you know, maybe agricultural productive land use to more, you know, non-productive land use, industrial agriculture and monoculture, deforestation, land tenure insecurity leading to displacement, loss of communal land, unregulated urban sprawl, and overall an increase in the inequality of access to land. And again, if we see how that impacts on people, is the same pattern that we saw on the impact of climate change. So we have a double layer of drivers of, you know, risks and to the people that comes both from the side of land governance or, you know, inadequate or poor land governance, and on the side of climate change. To conclude, I mean, to add the third dimension that the reports unpack quite well is the rising inequalities in terms of financial or inequality, income inequality, and power inequality. Obviously, the two elements are connected, that, you know, lead to unchecked privatization of land, acquisition of land for speculative purposes, again, and non-productive uses, lack of adequate housing and creation of slums, dispossession of smallholder, particularly in farms in a rural area. And also, you know, this disbalance in power and income affects how the dispute resolution processes are kind of unequal or skewed or bound to, you know, lean to on favor of the wealthier and more powerful than on the other. So this creates really problems that impact the region overall. And very different types of land grabbing, you know, and the report describes the typologies of land grabbing that we face in the region, which overall, again, you know, impact very much in the same way than the other two elements, the climate change and the poor land governance change. So this is a kind of a quick summary introduction of the what emerged from the report. But I would like now to introduce our speakers. Actually, we have three speakers. Unfortunately, our colleague Murali had to fly back to Cairo today, so I couldn't stay for the session. But we have the two authors of the report, Mona Cheshin, independent urban and regional development planner and researcher based in Lebanon. Her body of work includes a wide range of projects, policy-oriented studies, and strategies on sustainable, just, and inclusive territorial development. She's the lead researcher and main author of the Land, Natural Resource, and Climate Change report in the Arab region. And then we have also Petra, who is the architect and urban planner and PhD candidate in urban studies. And her work focuses on public space, housing, land and property, mobility, and climate change. She presented the research in several conferences and published in several, art journals. She's also the co-author of this report. And last but not least, we really have the great pleasure of having Francesca Romano, Land Tenure Officer at the FAO. She's been involved in the negotiation and implementation process of the voluntary guidance of the responsible governance of land tenure. And she supported capacity development and country-based initiatives in the field of responsible investment and multi-stakeholder processes for improved land governance. More recently, she has been leading the thematic area on tenure, climate change, and environmental sustainability. And she has experience in Africa, Asia, and Central European countries. So thank you very much and welcome to all the panelists. It's a pleasure to having you with us today. and to hear directly from you, on this interesting correlation of topics. So to start, I would like to pose a question to Mona. You've been leading the development of this report, and thank you very much for all your work on this. Based on your research, what are the key challenges related to these three interconnected topics in the Arab region? Over to you. The floor is yours, Mona.
Thank you very much, Umbretta. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if you want to stop sharing the screen, but it's fine for me if you want to keep it. Yes. So yes, indeed, these are interconnected topics. Actually, our research highlights 4 critical regional challenges that fall at the intersection of global discourses on land governance and the climate change. The first is land degradation. This is a serious human-induced challenge in many Arab countries due to water scarcity, high aridity levels, and poor land and water management. Now, climatic factors are accelerating several processes associated with land degradation, like soil erosion and salinity. And in combination, human and the climatic factors and the enclosure of the commons in many countries are forcing herders to move to smaller areas, leading to their degradation. At the same time, wars and social unrest in the region and economic factors are leading rural communities to abandon their lands, which also accelerating land degradation and susceptibility to climatic factors. The second key regional challenge is resource-based conflicts, which mainly prevails in countries where pastoralism is still a main source of livelihoods. Our research shows that the private appropriation of public and communal lands for resource extraction and speculative development is a main reason behind such conflicts. The problem is more pronounced where public land is scarce and where tenure rights are ambiguous or undocumented. A reduced rainfall and seasonal changes are amplifying these resource-based conflicts since they are affecting the calendar and droughts of herders, and since they are leading farmers to expand and fence off their cultivated lands, consequently to abandon older cultivation practices that relied on their exchange with herders. The third critical regional challenge is land dispossessions and displacements, mainly of small landholders. The problem is not new. Unjust land policies and land governance system historically played a key role in land dispossession of local peasants. The rise of neoliberal policies since the 1980s and the growing power of the transnational capitalist class and financial actors in the economy is accelerating the dispossession of smallholders, causing their forced displacement. Today, small-scale private property holdings are increasingly disappearing with the expansion of commercial farmlands, infrastructure projects, and extractive industries. In addition, green grabbing is observable in many countries. That is, land grabbing under the guise of climate action. In fact, our research shows that Arab governments are facilitating the privatization of public and communal land for biofuel and food production, nature conservation, and other environmental ends associated with the climate change. However, many of these projects are leading to the displacement of poor and vulnerable groups. The fourth critical regional challenge that emerged from our research is chaotic urbanization and encroachment of public and communal lands and urban encroachments on public and communal lands, including climatic sensitive zones not typically suitable for living. This problem is particularly concerning in coastal zones where poor housing quality combined with locational factors exposes the inhabitants of these areas to risks of sea level rise, floods, and storms. Most vulnerable social groups are the urban poor, refugees, and rural migrants living in high-risk areas. Importantly, our research also shows that affluent groups have occupied natural sites and coastal landscapes prone to natural hazards and turned them to private residences or resorts. With their power and money, however, they enjoy more tenure security and have the ability to mitigate and recover from natural hazards compared to poor and vulnerable social groups. Lastly, I would like to add that these four challenges are interrelated, and they have poor land governance as a common denominator. In fact, despite the progress, Arab countries are still far from meeting their targets and responsibilities related to sustainable land management. There's also obvious inconsistencies between the commitments made by Arab governments on human rights and their actual practices, as evident in the deprivation of vulnerable groups from their right to land, rising levels of inequalities and vulnerabilities, and the widening gap between the rich and the poor. All of these issues are certainly very concerning in the context of climate change, as they can halt sustainable land management. Okay, back to you, Umbretta.
Thank you so much, Ramona. This was very clear, and you know, I think it paves well the discussion, because it gives the different dimensions that emerge from this research. The report highlights the relationship between land degradation and the disruption of agrarian and pastoralist systems in the region. We know that, you know, that in the region, a lot of communities still, depending on land, are practicing in some type of pastoralism. And this is a key contribution, actually, to food security in the region. But these narratives do not really appear very much in the normal, you know, not in the normal, but they're not very commonly and openly discussed. It seems that definitely a lot more attention is given to sedentary communities, farmers, or urban dwellers. Of course, the region is very much urban. That is the reason for that. But still, the role that pastoralists play should not be underplayed. Can you tell us how this you know, relationship between land degradation and the disruption of agrarian and pastoralist systems plays out in the region, if you have with some examples, and what are the emerging recommendations that come out from the report, and also, you know, from the different events and interviews and discussion with experts that you had in preparation of this report? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Umbretta. Yeah. Land degradation certainly has negative impacts on land health and the productivity, and can increase the vulnerability of the agrarian and pastoral systems to climatic factors. More specifically, land degradation can disturb existing food production chains and undermine rural and nomadic livelihoods, leading to the impoverishment of large numbers of people, particularly those who depend on climate-sensitive agriculture, subsistence farming, fishing, and pastoralism. As I mentioned before, land degradation in the Arab region is driven by several human-induced factors and activities. These include overgrazing in pastoral areas, inadequate agricultural practices and technologies, arbitrary land use transformations, and unregulated urban growth, land fragmentation, and poor land and water management more generally. The repercussions on land and people are severe in many countries. In Iraq, for instance, the lack of adequate irrigation systems has led to the desertification of large agricultural areas in Ninawa province, which was historically famous for grain cultivation. Open dumping, groundwater pollution, and lack of rainwater drainage network pose a serious threat in Lebanon, where wastewater and rainwater run in the same channels. During heavy rain, the channels flood, causing a lot of damage to adjacent agricultural lands, and sewage seeps into the soil, causing the contamination of agricultural produce. To be sure, some countries have taken practical measures to avoid, reduce, and restore degraded land. However, many of their interventions have shortcomings, particularly since these interventions have mostly prioritized land productivity and infrastructure investments and ignored issues of land rights and land-based ecosystem services. With this in mind, our report underscores the need for holistic, integrated, and sustainable land management approaches, mainly approaches that address the critical relationship between land degradation and increase the climatic pressures on land, but also the importance of sustained access to land and essential natural resources to the livelihoods of pastoral and rural communities. The report particularly expands on 3 strategies that land experts deem crucial for tackling the region's land degradation problem in the context of climate change. I will mention them briefly. First, there is a need to promote participatory land governance to deal with land fragmentation, noting that land fragmentation in Arab countries is instigated by inheritance laws and land markets, and is one of the main drivers of land degradation in the region. Key recommendations here include encouraging new forms of collective ownership and the joint land use arrangements, as well as recovering traditional participatory approaches to land governance like Hima and Agdal systems. The experiences of Arab countries like Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Jordan in recovering these traditional systems is certainly something that needs to be assessed in further depth so we can learn from. Second, it's important to foster agroecological approaches to address the critical relationship between land degradation and the growing pressure on land due to increased demand for food. Such approaches involve managing the environmental systems through linking food sovereignty to ecosystem management and the small producers. Knowing that small producers or small farmers produce 1/3 of the world's food, it's very important to support them, including through protecting land tenancy rights and encouraging land cooperatives. This kind of support is needed to curtail abuses of property rights in farming system, as well as to reduce the vulnerabilities of small landholders towards climate change. Third, there is an urgent need to support the sustainable management of rangelands in view of the positive role that pastoralism can play in combating land degradation. Protection of pastoralist land tenure rights is a key issue here, as it can help increase land productivity and halt both rangeland and forest degradation. This is surely essential to protect the livelihoods of herders and farmers and enhance their resilience to climate change effects. And back to you, Umberta. I hope I answered the question well.
Thank you, Moana, indeed. Very helpful also with some examples to make it much more visual and clear to all of us. I would like now to pass to Petra to describe and give us some more detail on the aspect of conflict over the land use and land use and land-related resources. You know, these are on the rise because of many reasons, and the impact of climate change is added more pressure on, you know, traditional conflict over land use that maybe used to exist between farmers and pastoralists, for example, or between expanding urban settlements and the rural uses around the city. So the report highlights the criticality of natural resource-based conflicts in pastoral areas and others. type of conflict. What are the key findings and recommendations on this topic? Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Umbretta. It's a pleasure to be here and present this research. Indeed, as all my colleagues mentioned, that land degradation is one of the main causes of conflict in the region, and more countries in the Arab world are being added on the map of land degradation, like Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Sudan. And other countries are facing an even more increasing risk of desertification, like Lebanon and Yemen. In addition to that, pastoralists and farmers in the Arab region, as was briefly mentioned before, they also face land privatization, land grabbing, and colonial settlements. For example, in the expert group meetings, we learned how the strong privatization of lands fragments the landscapes and leaves smaller and smaller areas for pastoralism. And Lebanon is one of the cases in this regard, in the high mountains of Mount Lebanon. Also, state-led projects of natural reserves delimit and restrict herding areas, like the cases of Syria, Jordan, and Oman. And in many cases, the end result of these projects are oil extraction and commercial developments. Last but not least, the Bedouins of the West Bank also face occupation and colonial settlers, and many activist organizations try to take back this discourse on climate justice in Palestine and highlight the roots of colonialism and militarism in this challenge. And in addition to these, of course, climate change is compounding the effects of land degradation and leading to more and more conflicts between the uses and the users of the land, if we can say so. And this is where land tenure becomes important, because it defines to whom, where, and when the access to land and its resources, notably water, is granted. So pastoralists often have undocumented rights over the land, which makes them more vulnerable in case of conflict. And when climate variability affects both agricultural seasons and pastoral calendars, the conflicts between farmers and herders emerge. So animals trespass on crop fields and cultivated areas intrude on pastoral routes frequently. But also conflicts emerge among pastoralists over water resources and grazing lands because they are forced into smaller grazing areas. In Djibouti, Somalia, and Sudan, the sedentarization of herders around water sources has led to excessive use of the water, and it actually reinforced land degradation. I can mention here the case of Marhal in Sudan, which is a rich experience to learn from. The Marhal is not only a livestock corridor, but it's a social and economic system that goes beyond the livestock management component, and it's still governed by customary laws and collective ownership. Some scholars believe that the demarcation of the Marhal would reduce conflicts and generate benefits to pastoralists and farmers. And several laws were passed with the aim of resolving this conflict in that direction. However, the demarcation failed to end the conflicts because it was the security concerns that trumped in the process, instead of aiming to really assert the right for mobility to pastoralists. And so in some regions, cultivated areas expanded still beyond the demarcated lines, and the pastoralists lost their resting places within the Marhal that they call Manzala. And in turn, because pastoralists still lack water resources and basic infrastructure along the corridor, they are forced to trespass away from the corridor to find areas for their livestock. So land ownership and rights form a serious challenge when it comes to mapping and demarcating these corridors, because farmers believe that they own the land. Some of them have actually purchased the land and they pay taxes for it. And pastoralists, they don't have documented rights over it. So with this in mind, the pastoral corridor or Marhal demarcation needs to be placed within a broader land use planning and policy framework, promoting a more efficient and equitable distribution of land and resources. And this would include, for instance, improving the management of the Marhal and not only demarcated through regulating the access, rationalizing the land use, and establishing recognizable local entities to protect the rangeland and make the use permanent. It can also rely on building and strengthening the capacities of existing customary institutions and civic unions so they can better support the mobility of pastoralists while attending to the needs of both pastoralists and farmers and sustaining their interaction and cooperation as they used to do before, because farming and herding are not necessarily competing activities. They were always cooperating before. And the use of technology here, for instance, can lead to innovative agro-pastoral systems, if you want to be optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra, for this example that really shows how the different elements are connected: the management, the rights, the land use, the need of building on what we know from the tradition, but also complementing with new technologies, because obviously all these systems have evolved, and the space is much more contested. So indeed, even the tools and the approaches to manage these competing rights and needs and uses need to evolve using, perhaps modern methods. I would like also you to speak to the two other key aspects that are in the report. One is the connection with the part of the political economy, let's say, of the equation. So the relationship between land dispossession and displacement. It was, hinted by Mona before, but maybe you can give us further examples and information. And then also the relationship between urban growth, climate change, and the impact on land tenure security in these, urban and peri-urban environments. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks. As Mona mentioned, urban growth is happening on peri-urban agricultural lands, on forests, on rangelands, on climate-prone areas like low-lying areas on the sea. And it mostly leads to change in the land use from agriculture, pasture, forest to commercial and residential. But more importantly, such shifts are not always unplanned or informal, as you might think, because, indeed, the large land acquisitions come second after conflict in the causes of displacement and land dispossession in the Arab region. And as Mona mentioned as well, it's leading to the near disappearance of small-scale private property holdings in many of the countries, and more importantly, the privatization of communal lands that instead would be a potential area to invest in more sustainable communities. So the drastic expansion of the commercial agricultural projects, the appropriation of the land and resource for climate mitigation schemes that are called green grabbing are also common. They're common in Sudan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, and in many other countries. And they are leading to the displacement of vulnerable landowners and land users. Smart cities are one of these projects as well, that use the slogan of sustainable energy production and so on to promote more elite spaces that are not exactly sustainable. And the problem becomes more severe where land rights are unprotected, again, and unrecognized, and where the land and the resources are exposed to the climate change and climate-related hazards. And when these two are compounded, like for instance, where refugees reside forcefully in such environmentally fragile and hazard-prone areas, they are more vulnerable to the climate hazards. They don't have the resources to fight it or to be resilient facing it. So they are facing a double displacement that, and they are left to their own to manage it. And this kind of urban growth is a result of the poor implementation of mostly existing land use plans, but they're not implemented or they're not enforced or they're outdated. And same goes for the urbanization, the migration, and the displacement that are all results in this equation. They are not causes. Here I can mention the case of Zahle, which is a district and a city in the Bekaa Governorate in Lebanon. The UNHCR estimated that at least 2/3 of the 1.5 million Syrian refugees who have settled in Lebanon live on fertile agricultural lands that are prone to floods. And in Zahle, the landowners are renting out large agricultural lands at very lucrative prices to Syrian refugees, where families establish their informal tented settlements because Syrian refugees in Lebanon do not have official camps. They rent the land, they subdivide it unofficially between them, and each family pitches its own tent. The camp is then managed by a shawish, who's one of the residents of the camp. And this is contributing to the loss of agricultural land, to the water pollution, and to the degradation of the whole area of the plain in Zahle. However, these lands in the Bekaa region are delineated in the national master plan of the country as agricultural lands of national importance. They also fall in flood-prone areas. Also, in all of the previous master plans of the city of Zahle, these parts of the plain were and are still zoned as agricultural lands. And the plans do exist. And in fact, I had the chance to be on the team developing the latest urban plan of the city of Zahle upon the request of the municipality in 2019. And all the environmental and ecological aspects were included in the planning, in addition to more details about water availability and water quality. But however, as long as it's more lucrative for the landowner to rent out the land to be a camp, this will remain the case because no enforcement of the law or the decrees will be in place. And add to that the failure of infrastructure planning, like the ones Mona mentioned, mixing wastewater with irrigation and drinking water. Several cases of cholera were detected in the country since last summer, and Zahle is one of the cities that is facing this challenge now, despite all the land use plans that were made. Therefore, managing urban growth and preempting the impacts of climate change on urban settlements needs preventive and proactive measures. A good start would be actually applying the land use plans that most of the time do not lag. And in support of these plans, there's a need for other land management tools, like adequate taxation system on land that would allow for the land use plan to be implemented, for housing policies to have more chances, to curb urban growth and allow for the preservation of cultural, agricultural, and natural landscape within sustainable land management plans that won't see the light as long as land is seen as a commodity that needs to be speculated upon for a few. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra, for this example. And we see, how, of course, it's already quite challenging to enforce land use plans and to protect, the areas of agricultural interest and of environmental interest in a context of peace. When we enter in a situation where there is conflict and there is also the related fragility of the institution, that becomes even more difficult. And that clearly is a challenge that several countries in the region face, either, active conflict and fighting on the, or at least in some parts of the country, but also dealing with the fragility even after years after conflict. And some of the areas keeping on relapsing into conflict, like we see in Sudan, where in fact, indeed, the weak land tenure right and the unclear management of the land was indicated as one of the key root causes of conflict. And until this will be resolved, until the land tenure and the land rights of the people in Darfur and different tribes in Darfur will be resolved, it's unlikely that actually the country will be able to emerge and set itself on the road to sustainable peace. So very many dimensions and intersections. I would like now to call upon Francesca Romano from FAO to actually reflect on this in the context of on the land governance. So many of the challenges and the solution raised are really related to good land governance or the lack of it. And FAO has been championing over the past 10 years good land governance, starting with the you know, the negotiated document of the voluntary guidelines on the responsible use of land, fishery and forestry, and their implementation. How do you think the VGGPs, that in short, for good reason are called VGGPs, so we call them VGGPs, how they are relevant in the context of climate change, both in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation? Please, Francesca, over to you.
Thank you, Ombretta, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the previous speakers and for the very fruitful discussion. Can you hear me well, Ombretta? Good. Thank you also for the introduction. Well, as you rightly said, Ombretta, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure were adopted by the Committee on World Food Security 10 years ago. And they are still the probably the most relevant framework globally accepted on principle of good governance of tenure of land. Are they still relevant today and in the context of climate change? I think they are, and they are even more than they were probably 10 years ago. For a various reasons, but the most logical one is that the voluntary guidelines promote principles for responsible governance of tenure, principles that only if in place can become an enabler factor so that securing tenure rights and climate change have a positive nexus. So what does it mean in practice in the context of today's discussion? It means, for example, that applying the principle of the voluntary guidelines call for a people-centered and rights-based solution to climate change. It means that putting a focus on collective rights of land, fisheries, forest, water, it's critical for climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, and we'll come back on that in a minute. It also means that only promoting an inclusive approach towards climate change is a viable solution, which means incorporating traditional knowledge within the solution. And of course, also embedding the recognition and respect of all tenure rights, including those of women, in the solution is critical. It also means, as one of the previous speakers said, that we need to pay growing attention to the trade-off of some of the natural base, what we call and recognize as natural-based solution to climate change, in particular adaptation measures. It was previously mentioned biofuels, but similar applied to afforestation and reforestation program. This issue was not so evident 10 years ago. It is becoming extremely relevant in all the regions while we speak. And definitely it also applies to the Arab region. Now, if there are several entry points on how to, let's say, frame the discourse on the narrative between tenure and climate change using the voluntary guidelines as a framework. To me, one of the most relevant entry point that I think was mentioned a number of times today, it's putting an emphasis on unpacking, understanding the importance of the commons, of common resources, and the contributions of those to climate change. I'm referring to pastoral land, of course, but also to forest, to water. The report correctly indicates that land in the Arab region is still governed by customary laws and practices, but that in many instances, the decision-making processes and instruments to govern this land are put under pressure and are challenged. And this is a serious threat, not only to the rights of those that manage their resources under common patterns, but also, of course, as a driver to increased land degradation and climate change. So as from the FAO perspective and contribution that we are trying to make to this debate, I would like to mention three possible entry points. The first one, maybe not so immediately relevant for today's discussion, but could be expanded to the Arab region, is again looking at and analyzing closely the linkages and the contribution of collective tenures to climate change mitigation. We have been doing that in Latin America. We are doing that in Sub-Saharan Africa, with extremely interesting results and powerful messages. It would be desirable to have the same in-depth analysis also in the Arab region, and looking in particular at pastoral land. These analyses might, let's say, conduce to very powerful messages to the political debate. The second entry point that I think the voluntary guidelines have been also quite instrumental to is, of course, the whole discourse about management of pastoral land. Some of the people in the audience might be aware that we have developed a number of tools that emerged from the voluntary guidelines on how to better manage pastoral land using the voluntary guidelines principle. I shall be happy to share some of the links to these tools. But an element that I think is important is how we have approached and are we working to strengthen the transhumance corridor in a few countries through a multi-stakeholder lens, which means bringing into the discussion multiple actors, some of which are often neglected. And the third entry point that I would like to make today is the whole discourse around water. The report rightly indicates that the Arab region is, unfortunately, is the worst, is the world's most water-stressed region. And so addressing governance of water is intrinsically linked to managing land. This becomes the nexus between land and water tenure becomes particularly relevant in customary systems. Most of the communities that access water through customary systems, and it was mentioned also by Petra before, do that through their land rights. And whether these are farmer rights or pastoral rights, but their access to water is governed traditionally through the rights to land and pastures. And very often, water laws as such neglect completely this aspect of access to water, which means that when a water law comes and is developed, in many occasions, the customary access to water is not recognized and is neglected. And this is particularly, let's say, challenging. So how is this related to the voluntary guidelines? We all know that water is not part of the voluntary guidelines, was not included in the negotiations. But the discourse and the, let's say, the debate around the concept of water tenure has evolved a lot in the past 10 years. We have been working in developing what we would like to propose as a water tenure assessment methodology. And I think is an extremely relevant way of understanding and unpacking water rights and the way these rights are linked to land, to pastures, to forest. So this methodology that we have used in countries, in several countries, not in the Arab region yet, I think could offer an interesting way of addressing the use of and the governance of water through a rights-based lens, and in particular through what we now define as water tenure. Maybe a concept that was not so well understood 10 years ago when the voluntary guidelines were developed, but that now has been substantially investigated and offers an extremely interesting way of understanding some of the issues raised in the report. I shall be happy to share some of these resources in the chat for those who are interested. Thank you, Ombretta, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And indeed, you know, we shared the same belief that the voluntary guidelines were a very ambitious document, very all-encompassing, and you know, 10 years is short time to actually assess and to expect that they would have been fully rolled out in the region. Oftentimes, we feel in the region that you know, the understanding and uptake of the guidelines is not as much as in other regions, for example, even sub-Saharan Africa, where they are very much used and referred to. But nevertheless, the guidelines remain a key document and that can guide the way forward with what in the region for the years ahead, and they can also be, as you said, you know, be interpreted in light of emerging challenges. For example, water rights. Water is really a key. Access to water, the right to water is really a you know, maybe at the community level, you know, but also as a cross-border aspect is very much critical in the region. There are several countries competing over water, for example, from the same rivers. We see that many of them are building dams upstream, you know, in their own countries, are very much affecting how water also flows downstream to other countries. We see that, for example, between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, or with, you know, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, of course, Israel and Palestine, and many others. So indeed, I think as the resource becomes scarcer, a more solid framework, you know, at the cross-border and maybe at the national, subnational level would be needed. We still have a couple of minutes in this interesting session, so we do not actually have time to take questions from our participants online. We have about 45 participants online for the benefit of those who are here in person. But I think the discussion was rich. We do encourage all of you to reach out to us, you know, individually or through, you know, our institutional channels if you want to more. I think the links to this report and could be placed in the chat. Also, Francesca can put additional resources on related documents. I just want to conclude by, you know, reading. I don't know if I can manage to share my screen. I don't know if you see it, but to kind of go through, I mean, all of you really, you know, very eloquently unpack the different aspects of the recommendation that emerged from the report. I just want to recap them quickly as a concluding note to this webinar. So it's important to set targets and commit, both on the land degradation neutrality, which is still a key topic for the region, but also on the SDGs, the implementation of voluntary guidelines. So it's important that these frameworks are understood and there are national strategies set in place and national targets that can be, guiding the implementation of different climate change and governance action. Indeed, this needs to be approached holistically, connecting the different communities of experts, the environmentalists with the land tenure or land governance community, and social protection policies must be put in place to ensure that actually there is a protection of the land rights of people sorry, I just have a small technical challenge, but I think you can still hear me. So bring together, the different communities, the land governance community and the environmentalists to have holistic solutions that work for all, and also keeping in mind that at the end, the humans should be, the people should be at the center of these approaches. And this could be, definitely the most vulnerable: urban dwellers, smallholder farmers, pastoralists, those who are living on land that is managed customarily or through communal arrangement. Land use management and land management are still at the center. Sometimes they're not perceived as new approaches. They're not marketed as much as, to address as green approaches, but they are still at the core of the work that needs to be done, as well as having functioning land management systems at the country level, including through fit-for-purpose land administration. We have not discussed that a lot, but fit-for-purpose land administration remains a key avenue through which good land governance actually gets trickled down at the country level. And ensuring that these increasing inequalities in power and in income do not take over, and that the disputes arising from these inequalities, they're actually resolved in a just and inclusive manner. And lastly, but not least, actually very importantly, this is really the focus of the Arab Land Initiative, is the empowerment of local actors and enabling local action led by local actors, through increased capacity, increased knowledge, but also accompanying financing to enable these actors to make choices for themselves and their community and to implement them on the ground. Because only, actions that are led by local actors, by national actors, can actually be sustained over time. And this is definitely a game that will not be resolved. Climate change or good land governance will not be is not a short-term undertaking, but it will take decades, and it will become more and more needed and more challenging as climate change keeps hitting these regions. With this, I would like to thank all of you, the speakers, the panelists, those who gave opening remarks, those who attended, all my team who helped me put this put these sessions together. And I wish you a very good rest of the day, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ombretta. Bye.
And we can leave now, right? The recording only.